Council meeting to order. Mr. Peterson, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Call, please.
Mr. Boyce?
Present.
Mr. Hampton?
Here.
Mr. Jensen?
Present.
Mr. Johnson?
Here.
Mr. O'Connor?
Present.
Mr. Peterson?
Here.
Mr. Taylor?
Present.
Ms. Wiles? Mr. Ayer?
Present.
Mr. President, you have a quorum.
Thank you. I would like to, if we could, take a moment of silence to honor the late Senator Richard G. Lugar. Megan Wiles, Councilwoman Megan Wiles, is out in Washington, D.C. right now for the Richard G. Lugar Excellence in Public Service Series. So if we could just take a moment of silence to honor Senator Lugar. His funeral is tomorrow. Thank you. Approval of the minutes for the April 23rd, 2019.
So moved. Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor, raise your hand. Approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. All those in favor, raise your hand. Motion carries 8-0. Petitions or comments by citizens who are present. I have none. If somebody would like to speak, there are forms to fill out right outside the door. If you drop those off to the clerk, I'd appreciate it. Mayor's report to council. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of council. First of all, I'd like to ask Brian Gray to come forward. We have given for years of service pins, and we used to do it at a picnic, or not a picnic, but a Christmas time dinner. We did away with that, and so I've decided that we honor at least 20 years and above, those perhaps at a council meeting. And Brian is, he called himself a guinea pig, but so he's the first one that did this. But we're talking about 25 years of service to the city of Noblesville, Brian Gray. And we have several 20 and above, but I just thought it was important enough to recognize Brian, to you. He's very dedicated to our engineering department and certainly a part of the public record. So with that, Brian, thank you for your 25 years of service to the city of Noblesville. You do a great job, and we'll look forward to another 25. Well, not about 25. Whatever in fact you want to do. We'll get a picture along. Well,
You can do it if you want to.
but anyway, that's a lot of time as a public servant to the city, and we appreciate it. I did take some time off, and actually during the election period. However, we did celebrate Arbor Day at the Commons, and the tree board, Rick, Mr. Taylor, thank you. I don't know whose idea it was, but there was a red oak tree planted with a plaque in my honor for my service, and we certainly appreciate that as we did celebrate Arbor Day. The Noblesville Preschool Art folks, that's Methodist Church preschool. It's 40 plus years old, because I have a 51-year-old that went there, so that's been around a long time. But those preschoolers had their art here in City Hall, and we had a little celebration of that. Did attend the Youth Assistant Shining Star Award for, again, sponsored by Youth Assistants. We had the prayer on the square. We did not have a prayer breakfast, but we did do a deal on Channel 19 or Hamilton County TV and Brandon Bennett, gave his testimony for that. Relay for Life in the Park, we did last Saturday. That's a great event that raises money for cancer. Coming up, we have a business visit to ID Casting. The Hamilton County Prayer Breakfast will be this Thursday. We have a ribbon cutting for Books and Brews, and the Public Works Palooza, which used to be Touch a Truck, will be May 21st at the Commons, and the Borg Warner Trophy will be there for everybody to see. So, and then the chamber lunch is on the 22nd. So a lot of things going, and looking forward to the future in that regard. Congratulations for those who were re-elected, and Rick, thank you for the service. We're not done yet because we've got several months to work at it. That's it for me. Are there any questions of me? Thank you. Yes, sir.
Did you enjoy your few days off?
I did.
I'm glad you took those.
Got a little sun, didn't do anything.
Attitude adjustment, right?
It was. You got to recharge the charge. I don't recharge often enough, but that's all right.
Good one too. Is there, some kind of symbolism with the oak tree? Is that why it's?
I don't know. Oak tree is a staunch tree. It's got some years on it. Maybe they're trying to tell me. I don't know. But it's very nice, and I was very humbled by that. Thank you. And Tree Board was the board, and they do a great job. So, power to them. Thank you.
I would like to add on the it's not Touch a Truck. It's
Public Works
Palooza. If you get a chance to go to that, it's really a neat thing. I just happened to be close by when they did it in the parking lot here last year, and there were families with kids in strollers all the way up to teenagers that just really enjoyed being able to get on the truck, and I got to hear a horn honk for several hours before they finally get disconnected. But
Patty has a snow truck with the blades, and those blades are 5-6 feet high, and they have handprints, fingerprints on the kids. Big kids too, I suppose. Got to have their finger handprints on them.
it was fully covered. I mean, the blade was fully covered, and I believe they then put a coat over top of it, and Robert could probably tell me more, but and today it's still operating with the handprints on, so it's kind of a neat thing. If you get a chance to go out to it, there's a lot of activity out there. Council committee reports. Lots of hands going up. Mr. Peterson.
Downtown District Committee met yesterday, and we are moving forward with the alley activation. We're starting to look into what's in the basements of some of those buildings. Mr. Head continues to work with the building owners adjacent to the alleys and all of downtown on that program. Sidewalk planters are pushed out until the fall planting, but it's the same planter. We've accepted a few more bids, but they weren't apples to apples, so it's the same planters. I'm surprised at how many different people own light fixtures downtown, but I'm starting to learn that. And NDOT, Duke, County, we're working on getting all these light fixtures coordinated and getting them to all look alike. That's been a challenge, but we're getting closer, getting the price together and the numbers and where they are, as well as getting some lights over the Riverwalk, some softer lights on a timer. I won't steal the Seminary Park from Mr. Bennett, but we're coordinating some of the furniture and fixtures that are going to go into landscape fixtures out at Seminary Park. Banner placements keeps moving forward. We are working on a human and pet hydration station in the South Alley. Is getting closer. It's a drinking fountain. That is getting closer in the South Alley. We're waiting on some construction then further to the south to make sure we get it in the right spot. Archways and alleys and some of the language of some decorative features. Nickel Plate Arts put that together. And we're starting to work on some of the outdoor patio seating, furniture, standardization of those two. That's it.
Mr. Boyce.
Thank you, Mr. Air. On May 3rd, the Roads Committee met. In addition to the administration, then we had Mr. Jensen, Ms. Wiles, and myself present. At the meeting, they're going to be posted tomorrow to the website, so I'm not going to go through all of the notes, but some of the highlights. We did an intersection analysis at Kerrigan Road and North Harbor Drive, that Oak Bay Drive. I know there's been lots of complaints and lots of you have heard a lot there. It really shows that there's no concerns there. There's only 2 crashes in 5 years and neither were bad. So a roundabout would be 1.5 million. So we're kind of looking at that and working with the state. We're not saying we're not going to do anything yet there, but it is a lot safer than what I think any of us know. But boy, it could be bad if something did happen. They are still keeping an eye on it. Other things we talked about were the levee trail. Earthwork is nearly complete there, but wet weather has really slowed them up a lot. They were supposed to be done by July 1st, but they haven't even been out there, I can personally tell you, for about a week and a half, so I doubt. The 19th and Pleasant roundabout, many of you may have noticed that there was a lot of work being done on there. That was warranty work, so just wanted everyone to know. I know Robert made that pretty prevalent in the newspapers, but that is all warranty work. In case anybody thinks, why did they just get that finished and started? We did our testing and decided that it was not going to last. As I mentioned, the minutes will be posted tomorrow if you want to go through any of the particular things in it, but that's kind of some of the highlights.
Thank you, Mr. Boyce.
Thanks, sir.
Any other committee reports? Mr. O'Connor.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Finance Committee met May 9th. Most of what we discussed, you'll hear about this evening with respect to a amendment to the Levinson Project Bond Ordinance. So I'll let Mr. Spalding and Mr. Treat speak to that item. Also, the budget realignments, which are also on the agenda. I will let Mr. Spalding introduce those and speak to each of those. I will say that on these items, the Finance Committee was supportive of what you are seeing this evening. I guess a couple items of note. Mr. Spalding and his team are working diligently on OpenGov, trying to get that in place for budgeting for 2020. He assures me that that will be ready to go for our process this year, so it'll be new, but ultimately it'll allow us to do a lot of things from a projection perspective. We'll have good data going forward, not that we didn't before, but I think it'll be in a better organized fashion and will help us make some better decisions. And then one thing of note, I think everybody here is familiar with the fact that House Bill 1034 did not pass in this session, which will adversely affect our ability to fund controlled projects. Doesn't mean that it won't pass in the next session with some different verbiage, but was certainly disappointing that the state legislature did not follow through on getting that bill passed. So just one of the consequences of what happens down at the General Assembly and how it affects us. But otherwise, the claims did not come with a recommendation. We didn't have a quorum. So, Mr. President, that's my report.
Thank you, Mr. O'Connor. Any other reports? With that, we come to approval of claims.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor, raise your hand. Motion carries 8-0. And I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Hampton. This just doesn't seem to be going away.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is Ordinance 20-0519. Council to consider Ordinance 20-0519, an ordinance amending Ordinance 54-1218 in connection with the city's pledge of local income tax revenues to the Noblesville Redevelopment Commission for the payment of lease rentals.
Mr. President.
Is there a motion to introduce?
Second.
Now, Mr. Spalding.
Mr. President, members of the council, Jeff Spalding, Controller. I'll try to summarize this ordinance fairly quickly. It's somewhat of a technical financial matter, but basically what's going on here is there's language that the council adopts that basically defines the circumstances within which we'll issue debt, and the credit community cares about that language, and what that language is trying to assure the credit rating agencies is that we won't issue debt and put ourselves at any type of financial risk. And there was a small little relatively nuanced aspect of the language we had historically been using around the issuance of income tax-backed debt, that in the work of our financial advisor, O.W. Crone, as they were working with the credit rating agency identified this little nuanced item and basically said, hey, we're concerned if you don't change that language, we might have to give you a lower credit rating because we think it presents an adverse risk to the ability of bondholders to get paid back. And very essentially what it is basically saying when we issue income tax-backed debt, we won't do so unless we have more than 125% of the necessary revenue to cover that debt, except we had an out clause that basically said in one set of circumstances, we would be allowed to issue debt and not have that 125% coverage ratio. Basically what this ordinance does, it eliminates that out clause, it eliminates that exemption, so it says all income tax-backed debt has to meet that same test. Jim Treat, who's here from O.W. Crone, he had the specific conversations with the folks at S&P, and he can answer any more detailed questions about their concerns and why they raised them and why he then recommended that we make this change. So with that, I'll leave it to you to raise questions, and he's available to answer them.
Questions for Mr. Spaulding? Say anything, or do we just want to ask questions?
Let me just add one comment.
Since you're
I won't
here.
go through the detail.
Identify.
Jim Treat with Cronin Associates, financial advisors to the city. So these were new criteria that S&P rolled out. It wasn't anything specific to the city of Noblesville. It's something they're starting to apply nationwide, and they're just getting into it in Indiana on how it's going to affect. And what it had to do with is how you peg your income tax revenue bonds versus your general obligation bonds. So just to give you so your GO bonds are rated AA. In the past, your lit or local income tax or co-op bonds were A+, AA+, one notch above. So in these new criteria, they were getting real detailed about focusing on what gives you the ability to keep it at one or two notches, or does it need to be back down to the same. So it wasn't anything Noblesville did, and it's something that you've had in these parity provisions or additional bond tests have been in all your documents for years. So, and it's something that we would never do, as I was telling when I was explaining it to the Finance Committee and to Jeff, that, we're very conservative when we recommend that you have the capacity to do bonds. And in this case, you've got more than 400% coverage. If you take all the bonds you have a lit backup and look at your revenues, and look at the bonds, even including these new ones. So it doesn't really affect you, but technically they look at the lowest common denominator in these things, and they say, well, somebody else could issue bonds, and dilute the coverage, and that's really what it's about. So.
Right. Thank you. Any more questions? Everybody good?
Question
For Howard.
This does not require a public hearing, but it's not expedite closing if there was a rules.
No, we planned on it being 2 meetings.
Just check.
Yeah.
Vote next time. And Mr. Ayer, back to you.
We have a proposed development presentation next. It's what we call the first look, and it's regarding consider introductory information regarding amendments to an adopted plan development for Crossroads south of State Road 32 East and east of State Road 32 East. Mr. Steve Harden. This is a development that we approved, I think, a little over a year ago. Harden, do you want to take your 2 minutes in the sun here?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll be mindful of, you're the second person that told me to keep it brief tonight, so we will honor that. For the record, my name is Steve Harden. I'm a partner of the law firm of Faegre Baker Daniels. I'm pleased to be here this evening representing Boomerang Development. Mr. Corby Thompson is here. Also, Sam Swafford from our office is assisting us on the project as well. Mr. President is correct that the City Council has already approved the PD in the original development plan for this project back in 2017, when Corby and his engineering team then went to do final design and engineering. Maybe you have read about how costs continue to go up and up in the development world, just like in a lot of things. And so they ran into a significant amount of increased costs that they didn't anticipate. So they went back and met with city engineering, city planning, kind of talked about how can we make this more efficient, maybe a win-win for city. A lot of times, one thing from a city perspective, it's a benefit to have less streets, curbs, sidewalks, sewer, water, drainage, because those are facilities that eventually have to be maintained over a period of years. So that the benefit, if we could figure out a way to be more efficient with the layout. So that's what we have here tonight, and if you've got on your, this will work here. So the main kind of exhibit is the kind of two concept plans. When we were here originally in 2017, this roundabout right in the center ended up being located right over the area where the stormwater pipe and facilities wanted to go. So it was very expensive to install a roundabout right over where those infrastructures wanted to be, where the drainage wanted to run. And so one of the things we've done is to relocate that roundabout from where it was, moved it over. You can see where the stream kind of coming down through here. So that has been relocated to avoid some of the costs associated with that piping. And the other big issue was going from 4 ponds before to 3, and then relocating this pond to the area where the site is lowest, which is right here. So you can see these essentially were being consolidated into this area. That allowed for an additional park to be installed here for the benefit of the homeowners, and allowed essentially a significantly better, more efficient layout for the project. Because of the city's ordinance for the UDO that if you're making changes essentially to your street patterns, we were coming back here to go through the process to actually go to City Council, Plan Commission, and then back to City Council. But that's in essence what is driving the changes. It is also we have a few other changes throughout there as well. We're adding 13 lots, so we're staying under the 2.9, so we're not changing the density, going over the cap of what was allowed. It just allows a lot more efficient use of the project. We have a little bit more open space as well. There's a little bit over about a half acre of open space, and a much more usable open space as well with the addition of the park. With that, we'd be happy to answer any questions, get any guidance from you as we go from here to the Plan Commission. Thank you very much.
Any questions of Mr. Harden? Mr. O'Connor?
Just one really quickly. Mr. Harden, the lot additions are primarily in area, is that B?
So there is, in Corby, and Sam will correct me if I say this wrong, I believe there's 5 additional lots here for the weekly alley loaded. These are the weekly homes. And then 8 over here for the larger lots. Yes, sir.
We went from 75 footers to 70s?
Yes, for some of those, yes. So the homes are staying the same, all the home plans are staying the same, everything we've seen before.
I assume your setbacks are changing,
Let me see.
cutting your lot.
Back one.
The setbacks are not changing.
Any other questions for Mr. Harden?
Just one, the buffer out there by, was it 32? Nothing's changed over there as far as,
That's correct, yeah.
Any other questions? So this is a total of 13 additional lots, not 13 plus 5. It's total
No,
of 13.
total of 13.
Does this do everything you need to do to put a shovel in the ground?
Does this, if this is approved, does that do everything from a development approval perspective that you need?
Mr. Thompson?
For the record, Corby Thompson, manager of Boomerang Development, LLC. I would say absolutely. We don't go to full construction plans. That's where we got bit last time. We got the full construction plans, got the bids, and it was just astronomical. Steve mentioned that one roundabout location. If you drive by the site, it looks like it's on a grass swale. That turned out to be a Waters of the U.S. Took a lot more mitigation than we anticipated, so moving that helped quite a bit. We had quite a few areas where there was 8 feet of fill under the streets, which, we put that up in 6-inch lifts. It's expensive, but there is potential for, settlement 20 years from now when the city owns the road. So we did. It's just a much more efficient plan, and that transfers, and there's less pavement, and so there's more space for park and more space for lots. And so this should get us to the finish line. So, I used to be able to do it on a napkin, but it changes so quickly. And, in 36 years, I put in one aqua swirl. It could be $40,000. This project had 4. I didn't know that till we got the construction plans. So, it's changing that quickly. So.
We had a discussion regarding the on-street and off-street parking for the alley load product, and you're adding 5 more lots to that. Have you compensated any parking since you have additional ground available? By taking out a pond, have you accomplished any additional visitor parking for those alley load projects?
We did not, for those extra 5.
Would you consider that? You've got the vacant ground sitting there.
I know Councilor Jensen asked for some of that last time, and when we got to the construction plans, we did add that along the streets. So being that this is a conceptual plan, I'll make sure it's in the...
I can't remember what neighborhood I was in the last couple of weeks, a lot of them, and there was one that they just didn't have any off-street parking. And their lots weren't deep, and so therefore, they were parking in the street, and the trash truck can't get through, and the mailman can't get through, and all those. Now, this is different in today's mail world, I guess, so it's not a big concern with mail, but it is a concern when you have young families with kids and you have cars parked in the street. So.
Given the layout, with both the main streets being only single-loaded without homes on both sides, there is going to be less need for cars on each street, the way that's laid out. The cars can park on both sides of the street, and so, but there's only homes on one side of the street, so there is more room there for cars.
Questions? Now's the time before he goes and spends more money, if he has any. Thank you. Appreciate it. Transfers, council to consider transfer TA-06-19 appropriation transfer in the general fund. Mr. Spalding.
Mr. President, members of the council, Jeff Spalding, Controller. This first transfer is exceedingly simple in concept. As certainly the folks on the Finance Committee are aware, and to some degree the rest of the council is aware, that, we've been making a number of changes to the chart of accounts, and departments are still getting used to that. And in the budget process for 2019, there were still a couple of circumstances with the fire department and the engineering department where the departments built their budget under the old chart of accounts, even though we were operating under the new chart of accounts, and we've since sorted that out, worked with the various departments, and they've identified amounts that need to be moved from one major series to another. And so all this appropriation transfer resolution is doing is moving those funds accordingly based on their follow-up analysis. No impact on their budgets, doesn't change the amount of their budgets, just gets the appropriations into the right categories. So that's it, if you have any questions. And we talked it through. Those departments were represented at the last Finance Committee meeting and were available to answer detailed questions. And from the Finance Committee meeting said they were comfortable enough that we didn't ask them to show up at tonight's meeting.
Any questions of Mr. Spalding?
Mr. President,
Mr. O'Connor?
I'd make a motion that we approve transfer number 1. Council consider transfer TA-06-19, appropriation transfers in the general fund.
Second it.
It's been moved and seconded to approve transfer TA-06-19. All those in favor, raise your hand. Motion carries 8-0. Thank you, Mr. Spalding. Transfer number 2, council consider transfer TA-07-19, appropriation transfer in the Parks and Recreation Fund. Mr. Spalding?
All right, this one is a little different in nature. This is addressing an issue that was discussed during the budget process, but not really, well, not enacted, not included as part of the budget, but since we've been discussing both with the Parks Department and the Finance Committee, and it's the notion of the city funding for the golf operations. The golf operations currently don't generate enough direct revenue to cover their operating costs, and we've come to the conclusion jointly, I certainly support this, that the Parks Department operating budget should be reflecting the fact that they're anticipating this golf subsidy. And so what this transfer does is it takes some money from the Parks Fund contingency, puts it into the Parks Department budget, and it's staged there prepared to make the subsidy to the golf budget once we get closer to the end of the year and they know the amount. But in that case, in this way, the full cost of operating the golf operation to the city is reflected in the Parks Department budget. That's the rationale behind this. And so that's what this transfer does. And Brandon Bennett, the Parks Director, is here to answer any questions about that.
Any questions, Mr. Spalding? Mr. Boyce?
Sorry, I've been called a lot worse than Mr. Spalding, so you can.
Any questions, Mr.?
Mr. Spalding, so this eliminates the coming at the end of the year and us changing and all of that kind of stuff, and us making a transfer there, right? So this, we basically have the visibility all year long, like we know this is what.
Correct.
But if they do better, then that's great, but we just know.
Right, yeah, it's now in their budget prepared, so they are prepared to be able to make that subsidy subsidy payment once the amount is determined.
Mr. Bennett has assured us that he's going to do his level best to keep it below that number, but he could speak to that a little more than I can, but I think historically the number's been around 200,000 plus or minus, but anyway, Mr. Bennett may want to make some comments since he's here, but he may not, so, but that was really
I like it.
kind of a
and
target number.
Yeah, I like it then, that we're not kidding ourselves until the end, we know what we can.
Well, Mother Nature hasn't been too cooperative to the golf industry the last 30 days, so. Any other questions for Mr. Bennett or Mr. Spalding?
Mr. President,
Mr.
I'll
O'Connor?
make a motion to approve transfer TA-07-19 and appropriation transfer in the Parks and Rec Fund.
It's been moved and seconded to consider transfer TA-07-19, an appropriation transfer in the Parks and Recreational Fund. All those in favor, raise your hand. Motion carries 8-0. Do we have any council comments? With that, do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
It's been moved and seconded to adjourn. We are adjourned.